Hey guys, welcome to Franklin Woodworks. It's time to start the finishing process, and that means sanding, lots of sanding. So while you watch me do that, let me tell you what my plan was for the finish. I wanted the entire bass guitar to be a transparent blue, with the fretboard remaining natural. Now because I was using water-based dye, I had to color the bass before I glued on the fretboard. Otherwise, the dye would bleed into the fretboard. This is not the ideal way to do things, but it was necessary for the look I wanted to achieve. Now, I didn't just dive into this. I did some testing with the color, and I did that testing on the offcuts from the body wings, so the testing would show me exactly what was going to happen once I started to color the bass. Water-based dyes tend to be splotchy because the porousness of the wood is not consistent. Some parts of the wood are denser than others, and the dye won't be absorbed evenly. To solve this problem, I used a thin cut of de-waxed shellac on the instrument first. That way the really porous parts of the wood would soak up more shellac, and this tends to even out the absorption of the dye. At least that's what the testing showed. Once the shellac is on, another light sanding of the bass, and I'm ready for color. And that's where the problem started. Because of my previous testing, I was aware that the blue was not going to be the blue I originally intended. It was going to be more of a bluish green, but what I wasn't prepared for, and what the testing did not reveal, was that certain parts of the wood would totally reject the dye. So I kept adding more color. It didn't help. I darkened the dye, and that didn't help. I even wet sanded the dye into the wood. Didn't help. I finally came to the realization that it is what it is, and that this would be one of the unique things about this instrument. So I moved on to the fretboard. First, I had to install the truss rod. I put a little silicone at various points in the truss rod channel to eliminate any rattling if the truss rod wasn't under tension. Then I covered the truss rod channel with tape to keep glue away from the truss rod. I trimmed the tape as close to the channel as I could so I could maximize the gluing surface for the fretboard. Now it's time for the glue up. I made sure that I carefully applied glue to both surfaces, making sure to avoid having squeeze out near the truss rod adjustment opening. I also taped off the body and the neck so that the glue squeeze out on the sides of the neck wouldn't get on the surfaces that were already colored. If you watched the previous videos, you may remember the index pins I put in the neck and fretboard that would allow me to align the fretboard exactly and would keep the fretboard from moving while clamping. Well, it worked out pretty good. Although the clamping was a little difficult due to the body being in the way, this process actually went well, and you can't have too many clamps. Well, since that went well, something else had to go wrong. Normally, the fretboard is glued on fairly early in the process, but because of what I had in mind for the coloring, I waited as long as possible. The result was a glue joint that was less than acceptable. There were tiny little dings in the edge of the neck that I just didn't see, and this caused little spots of glue to be visible where the fretboard meets the neck. So the only way to fix this was to sand it out, and that caused the color to go away on the neck. Once that was taken care of, I had to get the color back on the neck. So, doing what I didn't want to do originally, I taped off the fretboard with frog tape and did my best not to get dye on the fretboard. But this didn't work either. Some dye was able to bleed onto the side of the fretboard, which caused me to throw a tantrum, which fortunately I did not get on tape. So out of pure frustration, I just dyed everything, fretboard and all. I didn't want to show you the fit that I threw after that, but I just wasn't happy with the way it looked. It was awful. But then something amazing happened. I was just about to sand the whole instrument down and just do a natural finish. But I decided to sand the fretboard first, and I used 800 grit sandpaper because I didn't want to change the radius. What I discovered was that since zebra wood is at the same time very porous but yet hard, the dye stayed in the pores but sanded away on the rest of the wood, and it looked great. So I began the long, tedious process of sanding the fretboard and trying to make crisp lines at the glue joint. So that's where I'll end it for now. Next time I'll try to finish up the sanding and get the control cavity plate mounted, and maybe start the finishing. If you're enjoying these videos, please share and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and there you go.